Hey guys, it's Sensuki, and welcome to part 2 of my beginner's guide to Pillars of Eternity. This section of the guide will focus on how to play the game and interact with the user interface. I will showcase the options menu, basic controls, different UI screens, and demonstrate the general gameplay and mechanics, and give a brief introduction to combat and adventuring. I'm sorry it's been a long wait since the first part, but this has taken quite a while to compile, and as a result, I've missed much of the Cricket World Cup, and I'm now 2 episodes behind on Better Call Saul. Before I begin, I would like to thank everyone who watched my guide and spread it around, upvoted it on Reddit, liked it on YouTube, or complimented me on the various Pillars of Eternity communities. I'm glad you liked it, and I hope this part is just as good. So I'm going to load a save that I've got here. Okay, so I've skipped the introductory dialogue just to minimize spoilers. Currently, I'm running the game in 1280 by 720p, but Pillars of Eternity is best viewed at its source resolution of 1920 by 1080, as everything in the game was designed for that resolution. Obsidian used Ngui for their user interface, and it does not have a very good scaling algorithm, so the UI won't look anywhere near as good on any other resolution, which is a shame. Before I get into the gameplay, I'd first like to talk about what you're seeing on the screen. Pillars of Eternity uses a mix of 2D and 3D to present its characters and environment. The environment, as you can see behind the characters here, is actually a flat 2D image, which was modelled and textured in 3D before being rendered into several layers of extremely high resolution 2D images. There are several reasons why the environments look so good, as you can see here on these Ardra pillars. And the first is because the artist can theoretically use as many polys and tries as they like when building the scene, and they only have to make it good from a single camera angle. The second is because they're using multiple renders of the scene to simulate 3D lighting on the 2D background. Now I'm going to demonstrate this here with the characters and the fire. Now, I'm pretty sure this fire is it's a visual effects, or it has a visual effect, and there's a light probe around the fire. When I move, as you can see with my all-in wizard that I've got here, when I move closer to the fire, the character is illuminated in orange, but the background is also being illuminated by the lighting as well, as you can see on the ground, and this game does have dynamic 3D lighting.
What you need?
The third reason, they're also using a shadow map and an ambient map, and a lookup table for color grading and sharpness, among other things. The third reason is because they combine this 2D presentation with 3D objects such as 3D water, 3D doors, and containers, and I'll showcase the 3D water in a second. You can see, I think that's probably a 2D container, but there are 3D chests and stuff in the environment as well. And the final reason why the environments can look amazing is because it's a 2D image. A 2D artist can touch up the images by hand in an image suite such as Photoshop and paint in extra details into the scene. And that was the method that was used in the Icewind Dale games. I'm not actually sure if this area has any paint overs to it, but if they are, I think they're relatively minor. The main HUD, by default, uses 3 menus down the bottom. The party bar on the bottom left, just over here, the main menu in the center, and the combat log on the right. There is a solid HUD backing that can be turned on in the options menu for those who prefer more of an Infinity Engine look to the user interface, which I'll just demonstrate now. So to enable the solid HUD, you go to the graphics options and tick solid HUD background, and that brings up a solid HUD behind the elements. There will also be a mod available shortly after release that allows you to customize the UI, and I'll talk about that later. So I'm going to disable the solid HUD for the moment. Characters can be selected by either clicking on their portrait in the party bar or clicking inside their selection circle. You can also use a marquee select, which is a left click to hold and drag around the character. You make sure that you actually get their selection circle in the marquee select, and this can also be used to select multiple characters.
Of course.
It's one of the weird things about this though is you can't unselect all of your characters. You always have to have one character selected. Right click issues a non-select movement command so that if you accidentally mouse over something like a character here, I press right click, it'll just move next to the character. Right click, hold and drag also allows you to rotate your party formation.
Indeed.
If you are uncomfortable with the left click control scheme in the game, you can flip the buttons around in the options menu. So I'll show that off now. So you go to controls and I think it's in here somewhere. Yep, so formation rotate. So these are all mouse 0 and you can unbind, I think you can unbind these. But the right mouse functionality is all built into the formation rotate functionality. So if you swap those around, I don't actually know if you can have all 4 of those things bound to mouse 1. So I'm pretty sure that that's restricted and the game's kind of stuck in a left-click format. But I prefer that because this is how the Infinity Engine games was. When multiple characters are selected, their individual action bars are not visible. But you can use any of the party commands on the left side of the menu, either by clicking on the icons, such as attack, and you can also cancel the attack cursor by right-clicking, or you can use the associated hotkeys, which can be discovered by mousing over the icon. So you can see there in the tooltip that the attack hotkey is A, the stop hotkey or cancel hotkey is X, the select all hotkey is backspace. The formation key, I think formation is a sub menu, so it has a hotkey, but it's not showing in the tooltip. The rest, I don't actually know if camp is hotkeyed. I'd have to check the menu, and stealth uses left alt or right alt. And so with the formations menu, now what that is it means you can make a custom formation. So you click on the formations menu and it brings up this little formations box. And the currently displayed formation will have some green visual effects highlighting it, and you can change the formations. And there's also 2 custom formations. So when you click on a custom formation, I think you have to right click on the custom formation actually. It brings up this custom formation menu, and you can move your characters around in the different squares. I'm not gonna so like you just move them like that. So just left click and drag to move them around, and you can flip the custom formations open. I'm not going to bother using one of those. I just prefer the default one. Now, with what the stealth function is when you press left alt, your characters go into a stealth stance and their models become partially transparent. And I'll demonstrate stealth a bit later. But that's what stealth does. It also makes you move a bit slower. There's also a sidebar on the side of the portrait, which you can't see at the moment, that displays the icons of buffs and debuffs. Neither of my characters currently have any, so I'll show that later. And like when you select a character, the action bar will appear on the bottom left of the screen above the portrait menu.
What you need?
So as you can see, and then all of the action bar elements have some of them have submenus. This is the weapon sets, which displays the character's currently weapon sets, and there's always an unarmed weapon set that allows you to toggle your weapons off as well. Currently I've got a wizard, so this is the wizard spells menu, and you just mouse over the wizard spells to bring up the submenu, and that's how you select your spells. And these here are other things. That's one of the wizard abilities, and that's the wizard's grimoire, which I'll get into later. This is Kalisha, who's a temporary NPC, and she's a fighter. So she's got wielding dual weapons, and because she's an NPC, she also has a talk button, and you can click on that talk button, kind of like in Planescape Torment, to initiate dialogue with NPCs, which is something that you couldn't do in the Baldur's Gate games.
Indeed.
There's a clock in the middle of the menu, and that is used to show the time of day when you mouse over it, as you can see there, although currently it's obscured by the pause tooltip. But it does bring up the time of day, so it says day 2, hour 22, 19 Maprima, I think it is. I'm not sure what that month is. You'd have to look it up on the Pillars of Eternity wiki, and then 2823 AI. I think that's, I can't actually remember what that stands for. Anno something. Anno or Irokai or something like that. Oroki. The clock also has a couple of other functions. You can press on the clock to pause the game, but that, like in other games, the pause function is mapped to the space bar. And there's also two buttons on the left and right of the clock, and these are used to speed up and slow down the gameplay. So you can press S to slow the game down, or D to speed it up. As you can see there, it slows down the run speed, and the slow speed is 66% of the default speed. And I think fast mode is double speed, as you can see there. All of these can be remapped into the controls. Fast mode cannot be used in combat, but slow mode can be used in or out of combat. The left side of the menu contains all of the icons that take you into each of the individual UI screens, which I'll be showing off a bit later on. They are also intuitively hotkeyed. And on the far right is the combat log, which has tabs up the top to toggle the combat log and the dialogue window over here, which also shows the loading screen tips and all ambient dialogue and stuff pasted into the dialogue box over here. You can also collapse the main menu and the combat log if you prefer a minimalistic UI. I don't, so I'm going to turn them back on. Now I'm going to showcase the inventory, and to get into the inventory you either press the inventory button or press I. So this is the inventory screen. Your character's 3D model is displayed in the center here with their currently equipped gear. You can have up to 6 party members, and their individual inventories are displayed here next to their portrait. Now, their individual inventories are part of the character on the data side, so if you remove a character from the party, their items in these slots will go with them. There are also several different equipment slots that you can equip the character with various sorts of gear. There's the head slot, which you can equip helmets and hats. The cloak slot, where you can equip necklaces and cloaks. For some reason, they decided to go with a single neck slot, which is uncommon. In most games, you can equip a cloak and an amulet. This is the body armor slot. This one holds gauntlets and gloves. You can have 2 rings. This is the boot slot. This one here holds belts and gauntlets. Sorry, belts and girdles. This is the pet slot, so you'll find a bunch of cosmetic pets in the game, such as cats and dogs, baby dragons, and a couple of other things. And when you equip those into the pet slot, they'll be like a 3D creature that appears on the ground. It won't be selectable, and it'll basically just follow you around. It's just a cosmetic thing. This is a special slot for the wizard, and this is the wizard's grimoire. Now, the wizard's grimoire I explained in the first video. It's where they store their spells, and what happens is you right click on the grimoire and it opens up this grimoire screen, and it displays the known wizard spells. And these aren't the spells, these are the spells stored in the grimoire, and these are the spells the wizard knows. Now the wizard might know 10 spells but can only store four spells in the grimoire. So there are 6 spell levels in Pillars of Eternity, and first level wizards can gain access to first level spells. Now how you add and remove spells to the grimoire is you just click on the icons to remove them over here, and to add them back in you just click on them. When you mouse over the spell, it brings up the same tooltip as it does in the UI, and there's also a description for each of the spells as well. And they become highlighted when they are put into the grimoire. To open the descriptions, you just right click on the spell. It brings up a description page and it tells you exactly what the spells do. Now this is a first level wizard spell. It has an average casting speed, which I think means it's got a 30 frame cast time, but I'm not sure. I think that's what it means. The cast range is 6 meters in game length. The area of effect is 1.85 meter radius. Now that's modified by intellect, and this spell is a faux AoE, which means it does not affect allies, and it reduces enemy will by 10 for 16.8 seconds, which that's the modified duration, but the duration modified by intellect and modifiers. The base value is always shown in brackets, and it inflicts the dazed affliction, which you can mouse over and it shows what that does. So it reduces accuracy by 10, dexterity, perception, and intellect by 2, and reduces their movement speed by 15%. And the wizard spells all have an inherent plus 10 accuracy, because wizards have worse base accuracy than, well, wizards and priests have a worse base accuracy than all of the other classes. They're meant to be worse with weapons, but their spells have the same accuracy as a fighter's weapon attack. So I won't showcase all of the spells in this video, because I'll do that in part 3. I just wanted to show off the Grimoire UI. So I'm going to close that and go back to the inventory. Okay, so next up is weapons. Now, I'm pretty sure I summoned heaps of weapons into the stash. Yep, I've got them all there. So this is the character's weapon sets. There is a maximum of 4 weapon sets. All characters start with 2 weapon sets by default, and you can buy a talent to unlock a third one. And Island Demour have a passive ability, racial ability, that I showed up in the first video, that gives you an extra one as well. So to get the 4 slots, you have to be an Island Demour, and you have to have the Arms Bearer talent, which is a really good build for using multiple guns. So weapons have a tooltip. If you mouse over them there, it shows the name of the type of the weapon underneath the name, and whether it is one-handed or two-handed. And this matters because there are talents that affect it. There's a single weapon style talent and a two-handed weapon style talent. And it also means that if you have a two-handed weapon equipped, you can't have something in the offhand. Now, this is a wizard implement, and the reason that it's two-handed is because the wizard has their grimoire in the other hand while they cast it. I think all ranged weapons are considered two-handed, even pistols and blunderbusses. Now, as you can see, the tooltip also shows the attack speed of the weapon. Fast means it's a 20-frame animation. The range is 10 meters long. That's not the biggest range. I think the biggest is 15. The interrupt, which I will explain now. I said I was going to do that in the last video. Interrupt is a complicated system for determining whether you mini-stun an opponent in combat. In order to qualify for an interrupt, you have to score one of 3 attack resolutions, which I should probably get into. I'll get into the attack resolution system in combat, but you have to. There's 4 attack resolutions in the game. There's a miss, graze, hit, and critical hit. Now, most people will probably be familiar with the miss, hit, and critical hit concepts, but in Pillars of Eternity, it uses a new attack resolution called a graze, which is basically a partial hit. So on a miss, nothing happens. On a hit, it just does normal damage and duration. On a graze, it does half damage and duration. Now this has a it's special additive formulas for both. I think it's both duration and damage, and I'll get into those in a second. And critical hits have times 1.5 damage and duration. So the next bit underneath is damage. Now, as you can see, the scepter is a best of weapon. Now, what that means is it attacks the defense. It attacks one of 2 defenses. There's several different damage types in Pillars of Eternity, and armors have different damage resistances or damage reductions to different armor types. So what the scepter will do is it will attack the lowest type out of crush or slash, and usually that's going to be crush, because slash damage currently isn't very good. And you can also see that it has 2 different damage numbers, 11 to 17 and 9 to 14. Now, what this means is that the base number shown in the brackets is the base damage of the weapon, and the actual damage is the damage modified by multipliers. Now, currently, my wizard has a high might, so that, I think, if I go into the character sheet, which I'll show off in a second, I've got 17 might, which gives me plus 21% damage. If I go back into the tooltip here, it shows 11 to 17, so that's 9 to 14 times 1.21, or 9 to 14 plus 21%, or whatever. And then you can also right-click on the weapon to bring up the item description page. Now, this shows basically the same information, and it has a description about the weapon. Unique items in the game will have a written description. So there'll be like a lore piece about the weapon underneath their stats. Now, I think this would probably be a good time to go into interrupt. Oh yeah, I stopped talking about interrupt before. I should have gone on about that. Okay, so in Pillars of Eternity, what happens when you score an interrupt is you can only qualify for an interrupt on grazes, hits, or crits. On a hit, an interrupt will roll a 1 to 100 random number, so it's like a D100 number or whatever, and then it will add your character's interrupt score to that number, which is an integer value, and then it will subtract the enemy's concentration value from your interrupt roll. If that roll is above 51, you score an interrupt. If it's below 51, you don't. And when you score a graze, the interrupt roll is reduced by 50. So that pretty much means that by default, if you don't have a very good interrupt score, you're probably never going to score an interrupt on a graze. If you roll a crit, it increases the interrupt by 50. So that means that I think you have a 50% chance or something to score an interrupt on a crit by default without any modifiers to interrupt or anything like that. This game also uses a special formula to calculate damage. Now, how most added damage bonuses works in Pillars of Eternity is they are percentile bonuses, and the might bonus is a percentile bonus, and the percentile bonuses are additive. So what that means is when you have I think most percentile bonuses are displayed as a times number, so it'll be like times 1.5, times 1.2. The only one that's shown as a percentage is the might value in the character sheet. That's actually it's basically the same. So a simple example would be a critical hit, which is a damage multiplier of times 1.5, and the might bonus, which mine is currently 21%, so that's times 1.21. Now, instead of being say I roll 11 damage, say that instead of being 11 times 1.5 times 1.21, you actually add the one as for base damage, and you add the 0.5 and the 0.21 together, so it becomes 1 plus 0.5 plus 0.21, and therefore the damage multiplier is 1.71. So that becomes I think I said 17, I can't remember. 17 times 1.71. And that's what my damage would be on a crit, and then that damage would be reduced by damage reduction if the enemy had any damage reduction, which usually they do. And there's several damage multipliers in the game. Various special abilities have damage multipliers. I think rogues have a lot of abilities that do times 1.25 damage. The Paladin's Flames of Devotion also does times 1.25 damage. I think currently in the game it's 1.5. They're going to be changing it or something like that. I can't remember. And weapons have quality enchantments as well. So like a fine weapon does times 1.15 damage, and all you do is you add all of those multipliers are added together to form the correct multiplier. Okay, so now we have I'll go through and I'll show the different weapons. So I've got all of the weapons in the base weapons in the game in the stash. So here we've got the quarterstaff, which is a two-handed weapon, and it has so two-handed weapons have a longer interrupt time. Actually, that's something else I forgot to tell you about. Interrupts have a different length. So when you interrupt someone, a quarterstaff will interrupt them for 0.75 seconds, and the length of the interrupt depends on how fast the weapon attacks, and there's a couple of exceptions for that. So the weapon that does the most interrupt is the Morning Star, which is a two-handed weapon, and its special property is it has a long interrupt. So it interrupts when it scores an interrupt, it interrupts the enemy for 1 second, which is pretty good. Two-handed melee weapons such as quarterstaves, they interrupt for 0.75 seconds. And all weapons in the game have a special property. The Morning Stars is the long interrupt. The Quarterstaves is the increased reach, which means you can attack from behind another character. The next weapon is the dagger. The dagger is a fast weapon, and fast weapons have an attack animation of 20 frames. And fast weapons have a weak interrupt, so they only interrupt for 0.35 seconds. And the dagger is an accurate weapon, so it gives +5 to accuracy. The dagger also does slash damage. The quarterstaff is a blunt weapon. This is all pretty intuitive. The rapier is also a fast one-handed weapon, and it is also an accurate weapon. Now, the difference between a dagger and a rapier is that the rapier does pierce damage, so it's better against armor, weaker to pierce. Next up, we have the the estoc. The estoc is kind of like it's got a couple of different names. I think another name for it is a tuck, and it's basically a long, thin, two-handed rapier. It is a two-handed weapon, and its special property is it bypasses 5 armor, and this is one of the strongest weapons in the game. Next up is the hatchet, which is a fast one-handed weapon, and its special property is it is interfering, so it adds +5 to deflection. So if you're building a tank character and you want to maximize your deflection, use a hatchet. Next up is the flail. The flail is also a fast weapon, and its special property is it converts 30% of grazes to hits. Now, how this works is instead of converting 30% of the amount of the attack resolution, it's actually a random 30%. And by default, their attack resolution numbers is if you roll as 0, I think if you roll between 1 and 15, it's a miss. This is by default, where accuracy minus deflection equals 0. I'll go into that calculations of that a bit later on. Grazes occur between a roll of 16 and 50. And so that means that there is 35 points that can where a graze can be scored. And so converting a graze to a hit means that the 30% value is 30% of 35, which I think it is 10.5. So that there's a 10.5% chance that this will proc. Next weapon up is a stiletto, which is a fast one-handed weapon, and like the estoc, it also bypasses 3 DR, but it bypasses a bit less because it attacks more often. And the stiletto is a piercing damage weapon, which is also intuitive. The club is an accurate weapon, and like the dagger and the rapier, it's kind of the same. The only difference is it's a crushing weapon. Clubs are really good against opponents in mail armor. Next up is the saber. The saber is a normal speed weapon, which has an animation speed of 30 frames per second, or 30 frames, animation length of 30 frames. So the base animation speed is 1 second long. And its special property is it does higher base damage than all other weapons of its type. So it does 12 to 18 instead of 11 to 16. I really like sabers. I think they're a good weapon. The next weapon is a crossbow. The crossbow is a ranged weapon. It has a range of 15 meters, and it doesn't really have a special property. Just ranged weapon, it's just have different reload times and different damages. And crossbows are not too bad at the moment. I think the damage ranges for ranged weapons is still being tweaked. But basically, the crossbow is like the second or third slowest ranged weapon. It's good against opponents with high armor. Next up is the warbow. The warbow is the excluding wizard implements. It's slower than a pistol or a blunderbuss or a crossbow, but it's faster than a hunting bow, which is the fastest bow. Currently, warbows aren't very good. I think their damage is being buffed a little bit. I'm not sure. Next up is the arquebus, which is the most powerful ranged weapon in the game. Arquebus is, I think, I think it's a matchlock firearm. It is the slowest weapon in the game, and it has an interesting thing about firearms is they have some special properties. Firearms are naturally inaccurate. Pistols and arquebuses have a -5 malice to accuracy, and they also do less critical hit damage, as you can see with the -0.3 crit damage. So instead of doing 1.5 times 1.5 crit damage, it's only times 1.2. But they do pretty good per hit damage, and they bypass 6 armor. Next up is the blunderbuss. The blunderbuss is an awesome weapon, and it has a unique mechanics where it fires 8 individual shots. Firearms also have a really weak interrupt. They only interrupt for 0.05 seconds, so that's like a really small mini stun, but they do cancel currently playing animations, which is still valuable. So what the blunderbuss will do is it will fire 8 projectiles at -10 accuracy with a base damage of 6 to 9, and it will also bypass 4 DR, and the crit damage is also not as strong. Blunderbusses are excellent on ciphers and rogues. Next up is the wand, which is an implement. The implements can be used by any character, but they're best with a wizard. Wand is a fast attacking implement, and all implements do best of damage type. So the wand does either pierce or crush damage, depending on which is the weaker damage reduction score of the enemy. Next up is the rod, which is kind of a weird one because it's like a slower implement. So it's like if you're fighting an enemy with a bit higher armor, and you have a wizard, switch to the rod unless you've picked weapon focus with one of the other ones or something. The rod also does pierce and slash damage. Next up is the hunting bow. The hunting bow is the fastest firing bow in the game. I think it's the same speed as the rod. I can't actually remember. And currently the hunting bow, it goes pretty well. It's like it's a good range weapon if you're stacking attack speed bonuses. Because it fires quickly, you'll benefit from the attack speed bonuses more often. I think the chanter is and the ranger can stack attack speed bonuses. So that's a couple of characters that you can effectively use the hunting bow on. Next up is the pistol. The pistol is I think it's the third or fourth most powerful. I can't remember if I think it's a little bit weaker than a crossbow. So it's basically the same as the arquebus. It's got a bit better of an interrupt. I'm not actually sure if that's a bug or not. I don't know. That's interesting. It's got a stronger interrupt. I never actually knew that before. So apparently, if you shoot someone with a pistol, it interrupts them for a bit longer. So it's basically just a one-handed firearm. Same mechanics as an arquebus. Does pretty good per hit damage. Has an accuracy penalty. Bypasses 6 armor. All that kind of stuff. Next up is the warhammer. The warhammer is a normal average speed one-handed weapon, and its special properties, it does best of type damage. So it does either crush or pierce. Next up is the spear. The spear is one of my favourite weapons in the game. It's a one-handed weapon, and it is the only average speed one-handed weapon that is accurate. It also does pierce damage, which is not too bad. Next up is the sword. The sword is kind of similar to the warhammer, except it does best of slash and pierce. Next up is the mace. The mace is a good weapon. It's an average speed one-handed weapon, and it bypasses 3 DR. The battle axe is also an interesting weapon. It does slash damage, which is the weakest damage type in the game, but it's good on characters that can score a lot of critical hits. It adds plus 0.5 to the crit damage multiplier. So instead of doing times 1.5 damage on crits, it'll do times 2 damage, which is pretty good. Next up is the greatsword. The greatsword is kind of like the sword. It's basically just a two-handed sword, and it has the same special property. It does slash or pierce damage. I've already shown off the Morningstar. Next up is the poleaxe. The poleaxe is another best of damage type, does slash or crush. And finally, we have the pike, and the pike is pretty much the same as a quarterstaff, except it does pierce damage. Next up, we have the different armor types in the game, of which there are 8. Well, technically 9 if you include clothing. The weakest armor in the game is robe armor, and it has a DR of 3, and it has a recovery penalty of minus 15%, so it slows you down by 15%. That's an additive formula like damage, and I think because recovery speed is actually it's shown in percentage instead of like a times. So if you have a minus 15% and minus 20%, it becomes minus 35%, obviously. So that's the robe. I think the next... I've actually equipped that, so double click to equip. What's the next one? Padded armor, I think, is next. Now, what you can see here is the padded armor has DR of 4 and a recovery speed of minus 20%, and it has different DR types for different types of armor. These are actually percentile... These are percentages of the base value, and this is not shown in the user interface, which can be a bit confusing. I'm considering writing a custom string in a mod to correct all of those inconsistencies. So it gives, I think it might be 5.25 crush and pierce, and then like 3 point something, maybe it's 3.25 or something, burn and corrode DR. What's number 5? I think hide armor is next. Yeah, hide armor has a DR of 5. As you can see, the recovery speed goes up 5% every point of DR, and hide armor is strong against pierce and freeze, but weak against corrode. I think leather armor's next. Yep. Leather armor's good against slash and weak against corrode. Lots of armors are weak against corrode, actually. I think scale armor is next, and I think Kalisha's got some. Scale armor has a DR of 7. It's strong against slash and freeze, and weak against pierce. And 8. Next up is breastplate. Breastplate is strong against pierce, weak and slightly weak against burn or freeze. So it's not too bad against all armor types. Next up is mail armor or chainmail. It's really good against slashing weapons, but it's terrible against crushing weapons. And then we have brigandine armor, which has a DR of 10. Brigandine is really good against crushing weapons and weak against corrode. And finally, we have plate mail armor. And plate armor is a special type of armor because it is considered one step up from all of the other armors. It has a DR of 12. It's strong against slash and pierce and really weak against shock damage. So you won't actually find a suit of plate armor until you start finding fine versions of other armors. Okay, so as you probably noticed, this is the stash screen. And what the stash is, it's like your bag of holding. So once your inventory is full, all of your items start going into your stash, and you can also transfer items between the stash and the party screen as well. There's an option in the game options called I think it's disable stash anywhere, and what that does is it limits your stash, the availability of your stash to when you're resting and at shops and in your stronghold. So that's completely optional. It's automatically turned on expert mode. I like access stash anywhere, and to move items to and from your stash, you can click and drag between the different screens, or you can press shift click. I think that works. No, it only works from the inventory. So if you want to stash an item, you can press shift click and it puts it in the stash. But it doesn't work shift clicking back for some reason, so I might actually report that as a bug and get them to make it so that it does put it back into your inventory or something. I'm not sure. But yeah, you just drag and drop. You can also drop the item on the stash button, and that will put it in there as well. Next up, we have the character sheet over here. Displays the health and endurance values, and these are all tooltips, so you can mouse over it and you get a pop-up of what health and endurance is. It shows this is the damage of weapons modified by all multipliers, the accuracy of characters, and this is the armor stat sheet. This is your camping supplies, which I'll talk about a bit later. This is your party gold. There's several different types of currency in the game, but it's all converted into copper pieces. So you might pick up like a golden oblio or golden aureole or something like that. I can't remember. Oblate. Like a golden oblate, and that will have like a value of 12 copper pieces or something. You can also highlight items here with the so if you got like, it's the same in the stash, but if you want to highlight different things in the inventory, you can click on the item. So I'll transfer a couple in and I'll show you how it works. It's basically just a filter. So if you toggle the filter on, it makes the ones not of that type transparent, and to disable the filter, you just untick it. I think now the last thing is crafting and enchanting. The crafting menu, you just click on the crafting menu. I think this menu is actually getting a workover, but you can craft food. And what food is you can craft dishes from base food ingredients. So like beer is an ingredient, it gives +1 damage reduction for 300 seconds. You can consume these in or out of combat, and I think you can also consume them from the inventory. And you can get different basic ingredients and craft a recipe. You need to craft something, you need all of the basic ingredients, and you also need some money as well. You can also craft potions, and you need different crafting ingredients, which you'll find in the game world. And those crafting ingredients will be stored in your stash under this tab here. And I think for a lot of crafting stuff, you also need gems, and I don't think they are stored in the stash. The other menu that's relevant to the inventory is the enchant screen. This screen is getting a complete remake in the day one patch, and what it is it provides a way to upgrade your weapons. There's lots of different properties for magical items in the game, but the enchanting menu only allows you access to certain things. So if I go to enchant my scepter, it'll allow me to upgrade the quality of the enchantment, add a secondary damage. Now these have a special maths. They're not actually a damage multiplier. What happens when you roll damage in the game? Your total this will be 25% of your total damage, and it will also face off against 25% of the DR of the DR type that it's facing off against. So if I'm facing up against a lion with 4 burn DR, because it's plus 25%, it will face off against 1 burn DR. So the value, if say I roll 10 damage, and the lion has 4 DR, but I'm bypassing the base DR with an S-Stock or something like that, or a something like vulnerable attack, something that bypasses DR just for the purposes of the demonstration. So I roll 10 damage. This will give me 25% of my 10 damage, so it will be 2.5 damage, but that will be reduced by 1 because the lion's burn DR is 4. So it will be reduced by 1 DR, and my proc damage will be 1.5. I'll provide all the formulas for these in the description, I think, just to give people a bit of a hand. The other property is Slaying, which gives you an accuracy and a damage bonus against certain types, and you can actually have bonuses against the playable races as well. Okay, so I'll move on to the next screen, which is the character record. Okay, this is the character record here. It shows your character portrait like the inventory screen does, and it also shares the same stash sheet. And up the top here, it displays the portraits of all your characters as a little circle, and you can either click on those or click these buttons here to toggle through them. It shows your character name, and as you can see, I'm using special characters like I demonstrated in the first video. It shows your class, so like first level wizard, race, background, and experience. The experience bar will fill up as you gain experience. It shows all of your attribute scores. Now all of these things have tooltips. I think you have to click on the ones that aren't red, so it brings up a description of those. And these ones here are highlightable, so you can bring that up and it'll show a tooltip. Now, there are 5, I haven't showcased skills yet, so I'll talk about those now. There are 5 skills in Pillars of Eternity: Stealth, Athletics, Lore, Mechanics, and Survival. Mechanics comes into play during exploring, as it is used to find hidden compartments, detect traps, and pick locks. In combat, Mechanics is used to increase the accuracy of the traps that you lay, and each character can have 1 trap set at a time. And you can also recover the traps that you place if you don't want to leave it there. You do not have to have the Mechanics skill to set traps, it just makes the accuracy better. To use Mechanics in the environment, you have to actually be in stealth mode, and stealth is used for sneaking up to enemies and stealing from containers, and I'm going to demonstrate those. Okay, so to press stealth mode, you press the Alt key, or you just press the icon, and you move around, and sometimes containers can belong to people, so what the aim of how to steal something from someone is to go out of vision, which I don't know if I'm out of vision over here. And then when you're out of vision, you sneak in and see this red icon down here with the eye means that these people can see me. When they can't see me, there'll be no, I'll go over here and I'll show you.
The better part of that.
Okay, so now I can't be seen, and the red circle ticks down, and then it'll go yellow again. And once the yellow screen ticks down, that means that I'm not seen and no one is alerted to my presence. The yellow basically means that if you don't move away, you're going to be seen. So now I can stealth in closer to people, and as you can see, I got seen easily because I don't have good stealth. But you can stealth and steal containers from people when you don't have the red icon above you. So I'm going to steal those out of that container. So yeah, this is the loot UI. So it brings up a pop-up. You can move it around, drag it around the screen. There is a take all button, and you just press that, or you can individually drag and drop stuff in between the containers. You can also click on the stash icon and then drag stuff into the stash, or I'll go back and I'll put the stuff back in here. If you want to stash it, you can also double click the stash icon and it puts them in the stash. and I think you can do the same for the characters as well. Yeah, so that gives it to my inventory.
Yes.
Now, stealth is one of the only systems in the game that I don't actually know the raw math for, but I showed, I think each unit has a different alert level and a different detection level. I think those are integers, and they face off against your stealth score, which is also an integer. Okay, so the next skill that I want to show off is athletics, and I'll do that in a second. So as you can see, athletics is currently displaying a plus 0% max fatigue and plus 0% combat fatigue. And athletics is used in scripted interactions and stuff for physically enduring things. Athletics determines how long you can go before you need to rest. Once again, like, I'm not 100% sure what the minimum amount of time is before you get fatigue with 0 athletics, but I know that combat makes you get fatigue faster, and that's what that plus 0% combat fatigue gain means. There are 2 different levels of fatigue. Minor fatigue, which gives you fair penalties to lots of your combat stats and skills, and major fatigue, which is a huge penalty. It's a huge penalty, and it's really, really dangerous to be in combat if you're in major fatigue. You won't be able to hit anything. The Baldur's Gate games didn't really have super huge penalties for being fatigued, but the Icewind Dale games did. I haven't played enough of the game to know what you can get away with when you're fatigued, but it's generally a good idea to rest when you're fatigued. Before I go on about the other skills, I'll talk about the resting system. When you rest in the wilderness, you consume camping supplies, which is this menu here, and it also shows your camping supplies here. And to rest, you actually click on that button, or you press R. The number of camping supplies that you can carry at once is limited by your difficulty setting. Easy difficulty is 6, normal is 4, and hard and Path of the Damned is 2. You can kind of get around this limitation by resting when you find a camping supply, because then you can just rest and then pick up the camping supply from the container that you found it in. Personally, I would have preferred a campfire system like Knights of the Chalice to the camping supply system that they have. You can also rest at inns and through some dialogue sequences, e.g. when someone lets you rest at their house or something like that, which is like an option you would pick in dialogue. Oh yes, I'd like to rest, and then you go to the rest screen or whatever. You can also rest at the Stronghold, which you'll get access later on in the game. The Stronghold and the inns both offer special rooms that you can rest in. Inns you have to pay to rest, and the Stronghold is free resting. And when you rest in these special rooms, you get bonuses to attributes and skills, which last until the next time you rest. And these attribute and skill bonuses can be good for overcoming hard-to-pass attribute and skill checks. So if you've got like a middling skill and you need to pass a check for a scripted interaction or something, you can like chuck on different items that give you skill bonuses and go and rest at an inn to get an extra bonus, and then come back and complete the check. Okay, so the next one is survival. Survival is checked in dialogue and scripted interactions for things related to survival, of course. There's a description about it which you can mouse over, but in combat, survival increases the duration of your non-potion consumables, which is the food items that I showed before, like beer, eggs, cheese, and the dishes that you craft. And currently that is a multiplicative bonus, but I think that's a bug. I'm not sure if it affects drugs. Lore allows you to use scrolls, and scrolls and Pillars of Eternity are wizard spells. So you can have like a high lore fighter that can cast wizard spells from scrolls. Below the skills section is the ability and talents section. And these contain a list of the abilities and talents in alphabetical order, and you can click on their names to view the description. So this ability here is called Arcane Assault. It's 2 per encounter. This is like the wizard starting ability. And I'll showcase this a bit later on. And currently I don't have a talent. You first gain a talent when you level up to level 2. There's also the active effects section, of which I have none at the moment. This section is really handy to check while paused in combat, as it is the most accurate source of tracking passives, modals, buffs, and debuffs. The tooltip in the HUD which is the one I spoke about down here, is actually slightly unreliable at the moment compared to the active effects screen. And the reason for that is there's a couple of bugs with some of the spells, such as when you cast Suppress Affliction, it actually freezes a lot of the effects on the HUD. But the true, I think it also does it in here too. I'm not sure. That bug has been reported, and it may be fixed before release. Now below the portrait, you see that section that I talked about before. On the right, we have the character record, and this contains personal and party information, information about stats, and it also so like this is just like the general stuff about your playthrough, and these like stats of the party. So Kalish is the NPC that's been in the party the longest, and then it'll have like who's defeated the most enemies, who's done the most damage, all that kind of stuff. And this is the personal sheet. It shows the personal sheet for the currently selected character. So as you can see, it's just because I haven't actually been in combat yet. It's just showing a different time and party. Okay, so I'll move on to the next screen. Next up, we have the journal screen, and there's also this menu down the bottom here, so you can click on these buttons or you can press the hotkeys. The journal section contains 4 sections: quests, journal, cyclopedia, and notes. The quest screen tracks individual quests in the game, which I believe there are close to 100 quests in total, and most being completely optional. Now, doing quests in Pillars of Eternity is how you get most of your experience. So like to level up, you have to actually do quests. There are 3 types of quests in the game. Main quests, which is the part of the main storyline, which I assume all must be resolved in some manner. Quests, which are optional side quests in the game. A quest equivalent from the Infinity Engine games might be solve the Bridge District skin murders from BG2. And tasks are kind of like minder quests, and the equivalent of a task from the Infinity Engine games might be Roger's Sea Troll from BG2. By default, quests have explicit objectives, which are showed in red text with a plus. These can be disabled in the options menu if you prefer BG1 style quest tracking, which I'll show a bit later. Actually, no, I'll do that now. I'll go to, okay, so you go to game options, and then I think it's detailed quest updates. No, it might be that one. You can just say, yeah, quest updates and detailed quest updates. I think those are the 2 options there. And there's one down there. Okay. Yeah, there we go. So it removes the explicit objective, and it just has a Baldur's Gate 1 style quest objective. So it's up to you which one you prefer. You can just toggle those back on and off at any time you wish, as long as you don't have expert mode enabled. Now, the journal section, which is something I spoke about in the first part of the video, and it contains your biography, which is automatically written as you progress through the game, and choices you make in the game affect what is said in your biography. As you can see, the beginning of my journal has been started based on the background choice that I chose for this character, and I'll give an example of how dialogue choices can affect your journal a bit later on in the guide. The Cyclopedia contains information about many things in the game. It has 8 sections. Bestiary, which contains information about the monsters you fight. Now, I haven't fought any monsters, so it doesn't have any entries. The Bestiary is automatically filled up when you fight monsters. Every time you kill a new creature, it will be added to the bestiary. Creatures do grant some XP when you kill them, but only until you've fully unlocked their bestiary entry. So it'll take a certain amount of creatures to fully unlock all of the stats for that creature, and once you've unlocked all of the stats for the creature, you don't gain experience from fighting those creatures anymore. Now, in combat, when you mouse over an enemy, there'll be a tooltip that appears in the top left of the screen that displays information from the bestiary. I'll demonstrate that a bit later. Not every creature is homogeneous, and there are special versions of different creatures, or like boss or NPC versions, and they'll have different stats to the base creature. So if you have information about the best base creature in the bestiary, these values will be shown with a grey in grey with a question mark, and when you mouse over the special creature, and the values will change depending on what attacks it or you makes in combat. And these the values of special creatures are not stored in the bestiary, and neither are values for playable races. Afflictions and injuries are negative status effects. Afflictions are mostly inflicted through abilities, spells, and secondary attacks. And a type of affliction is blinded, which reduces accuracy by 25 and reduces perception by 4 and movement speed by 2, which is an integer, and reflex and deflection by 20, and that's pretty nasty status effect or affliction, but it doesn't actually disable you. Injuries occur in scripted interactions, and I think one of those is a concussion. Yep. And these occur in scripted interactions when you fail a check for a physically demanding task. I won't go through all of these. You can look at those yourself when you play the game. I'd rather give in-game demonstrations at the moment. Next up we have, there's also the note section. I think you can write your own notes, so you can create a new one, enter the title, Waffle Copter, and then you can type in your stuff. Then press enter and it adds the note. I don't know if you can actually delete notes though. I don't know if you can. So that's a note. Next up we have the area map. And this is the the area map. Wilderness maps, dungeon maps, and hostile maps will have a black fog of war. So as you can see, most of the map is black, but the explored area is, I can actually see the map in the area map. The cities and town maps will all have grey fog of war. Grey fog of war is like what I'm mousing over here, if you can see up the top of the screen. That's just a bit darker and you can't actually see the units visible in that section. Anyone who's played isometric like MOBAs or RTS games or whatever will understand that concept pretty easily. The area map can be toggled into the world map by clicking this button. I'm not going to click that now for spoiler purposes because it spoils the locations of various things in the map in the current version. And one of the ways that you can travel in the game is say you want to travel across the map. You can just double click in the area map and then just press it. That's really fast. So like if I want to travel over here, I just double click and click. The next menu I can't show off, which is the stronghold menu, because of spoiler purposes, due to the limitations of the press version of the game. We're not allowed to show content past a certain level, and the stronghold is part of that content. But basically later on in the game you'll gain access to the stronghold, which is a castle in the game that is kind of its own strategical minigame. You'll have to repair it and invest money in it to manage it as well, but it is an optional minigame. You don't have to actually do anything with it. Managing the stronghold, I think, takes a little bit of influence from Crusader Kings 2, and I'll include a link in the video description to the stronghold wiki entry. Finally, we have the game options menu. This is the menu screen where you can save or load. This is the game options screen. You can change the difficulty at will. And there's also several game options that you can have here. And there's lots of different choices in Pillars of Eternity about what you want to disable. This is the one I talked about before, don't restrict stash. So when I turn that off, I won't actually be able to access my stash. So if I go in here, I can't actually put any items in my inventory. I have to be in town. So I can turn that back on. This one, show personality and reputation. So this is for the stat sheet. When you turn that off, it won't show those reputation things. I don't actually think it'll show anything. I think that's what it does. Oh no, that's the dialogue one. So that will show the personality and reputation stuff in dialogue. So that's not related to the reputation stuff in the inventory. Main companions before death is having this on disables permadeath. And I talked about that in the first video. Show relative defenses is basically a tooltip thing. Like I talked about before, when you hover over an enemy in combat, it'll show a tooltip up in the right corner of the screen, and that will have the stats from the bestiary. This this option, if you untick that, turns that off. I think it turns the whole tooltip off, actually. Area of effect highlighting I'll display a bit later, but that's actually really useful. Actually, no, I'll do it now. No, I don't want to save my changes. Okay, so what area of effect highlighting is when you click an area of effect, it basically shows what it's going to hit. So like when you have that off, I think it doesn't actually show those circles. And like I spoke about in the first video, the inner circle is the base area, and the yellow circle is the bonus area of effect from intellect and other bonuses, and that is foe only, the outside. So if I did a damage spell and cast it there, I would damage enemies in the yellow circle, but not my party members. And I think if I turn that off, it doesn't show it. No, so you see how I can't see it anymore? So that's more like a vanilla Infinity Engine experience. And also, as you can see there, when I'm moving the cursor, you see those little feet that show up on the cursor? That indicates that I have to move to cast a spell at that point. Arcane Assault doesn't do anything outside of combat because it only attacks enemies. Next one is detailed quest updates, which I just showed before. Unqualified interactions turns off stuff in dialogue. I'll probably talk about that later. But basically, like if you don't have enough, a high enough stats or skills to unlock an option, it will actually remove that option from the dialogue rather than showing it. In the Infinity Engine games, that was the default setting. But in Pillars of Eternity, when you don't have enough might to meet a might check in dialogue, it will show the option, but it will show like might requirement not met, and it won't actually show what the option says. Unticking that will remove that option from the dialogue. Combat tooltips removes the tooltip up in the top corner of the screen. Show qualifiers. That will show the it will show stuff that unlocks conversation. I think it's very similar to unqualified interactions. They're like very similar. I'm not actually sure what both of those do, but they're basically related to hiding stuff in dialogue. And showing game tooltips is a beginner's thing. So if you're like new to this style of game and new to the mechanics, if you tick that, it will show tooltips in the game. I'm not going to turn those on because I'm telling you about the game. Developer commentary, when you have that on, will that actually do anything? When you first load into an area, it will start playing an audio track from one of the developers, and they'll tell you about the level, like how they designed it or something like that. This is the language options section. Quest updates I showed before. Screen edge scrolling is basically just disabling the mouse scrolling. Disable party movement stop on engagement, I'll talk about later. And disable auto attack is there's auto attack in the game, and disable auto attack will disable. It won't fully disable it, but it will disable it for a couple of instances. Tooltip delay increases or decreases the time for tooltips to be shown, like when I mouse over my character, shows the tooltip down here. It will increase or decrease the time for that to show. And the scroll speed is the edge scroll speed. Next up we have the controls, which I've shown before. And I don't really need to show. I'll showcase the actual controls in the game a bit later on. This is the auto pause section, which may be very important. It's like something that you really like or something that you ignore. I'm the kind of person that hates auto pause. I like doing all of my things manually, so I never use any of this stuff. But basically, what you can do is you can set a bunch of options that makes the game automatically pause. So like when your character dies, pause the game. When your character's hit at any stage in combat, it will pause the game. When your character is targeted by an enemy, when your character takes damage, when your character's below a certain amount of endurance, engaged in melee, all that kind of stuff. It basically allows you to control the combat a bit easier. Auto slow turns it basically when combat begins, it automatically puts it into slow mode. This option here pauses the combat after a certain amount of time. So if you set this to 6 seconds, it will pause the combat in every 6 seconds in real game time. This is the graphic settings. It's got some fairly basic stuff like vertical sync, full screen. Hide selection circles basically just hides those. Hide off-screen pointers is something that I have disabled at the moment because I don't like it. And but what you do is it shows an off-screen pointer when your character's off the screen. I don't like those because they're different from the Infinity Engine games. Font ligatures is it shows like a connection between a couple of the letters like S and T and F and something else. I like those on because they look cool. Colorblind mode changes the colors of selection circles and the health bars to make it easier for people with color blindness or color deficiencies to see the selection circles of stuff in combat. Because I think some people can't tell the difference between different shades of green and a bunch of other things, and the blue selection circles are medically or scientifically proven for them to actually be able to see quite well. And all of the colorblind settings have been rigorously tested. I think Obsidian actually have a few colorblind people in the development team. Gibbs is basically when a character dies through a critical hit, it plays like blood splatter, like their body turns into chunks and flies all over the screen. Solid HUD background I showed before. Cage cursor is because I'm playing in window mode at the moment. It keeps the mouse inside the game, so I'm trying to move my mouse outside the window. It won't let me because I've got cage cursor on. Big heads is like just a funny. It's like if you remember like Donkey Kong or GoldenEye or something like that. That's pretty much what it is. It makes everyone's heads really big. It's just like a lol thing. I don't really find it that humorous, but I'm glad it made it into the game. And show party endurance numbers as health is what you can see on the portrait there. It just shows their endurance number as a number down the bottom. You can turn that off. I like it on. Font scale and gamma are pretty self-explanatory. And finally, we have the sound menu. I think later on down the track they'll be adding in some extra sliders, and they'll be adding in a slider to turn on how often voice plays. Currently, effects volume is like it covers all things such as UI, in-game effects, and ambient effects, and hopefully they'll split that into 3 sliders eventually. Okay, because I'm taking so long, I'm going to split the guide here, and in the next part of the guide, I'm going to go into the hotkeys and the mechanics and gameplay. So I'm going to cut the video here and then go straight into the next section. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll start recording the next one immediately.